Welcome to the CEDH Summer Slam presented by Mayhem Comics and Collectibles. For those of you just tuning in, I recommend watching our previous videos to get caught up, but to summarize, the CEDH Summer Slam is a 3-round tournament with 4 teams of 2. Teams randomly rolled 2 and 3 color combinations and had to brew decks with commanders not on the database in any way whatsoever. Now, with their decks created, let's check out the pod today.
I am bringing Greasefang. It's a black-white stacks and vehicle list that uses its commander to make a board out of nowhere by bringing vehicles such as Parhelion and Sky Sovereign to the battlefield from the graveyard.
For this event, I'm going to be bringing Keskit Kydele. We're doing a Protean Hulk deck because apparently, turns out, Keskit is a sack outlet. Not a good one, but it's sack outlet. I've also got Staff of Domination as a win con as well. It's a Sultai Protean Hulk list that seeks to cheat out Hulk, sacrifice it with Keskit, and then win with a Protean Hulk pile with a backup Staff of Domination.
I'm playing Rafiq of the Many Infect. Deck focuses on landing 1 or 2 cheap Infect creatures or the commander, suiting them up with a bunch of combat tricks and Infect, and killing people one at a time.
For this tournament, I'm playing Evelyn the Covetous. It's a Grixis midrange deck that can win through many different combos like Cloudstone, Dockside, World Gorger, and Thoracle.
And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let's kick off round 1 of the CEDH Summer Slam. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Tanner draws and plays a Mox Diamond, discarding a land as it enters. He plays a command tower for turn. He casts a Talisman of Hierarchy and a Grafdigger's Cage. Jack sighs, and Tanner passes. Jack draws and plays a Windswept Heath for turn. He casts a Mox Diamond of his own, discarding a land as it enters, and cracks Windswept Heath, paying a life and fetching up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He plays a Viscera Seer and Deathrite Shaman, and passes. Evan draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetching up a Tundra onto the battlefield, which he couldn't do, but Karma will punish him for his hubris shortly. He plays an Esper Sentinel, a Mana Crypt, and Lightning Greaves. He equips Lightning Greaves to Esper Sentinel and moves to combat, attacking Josh with Sentinel. Josh takes the hit, and Evan passes. Josh draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He follows it up with a Jeweled Lotus and a Mana Crypt, not paying for Evan's Sentinel. He cracks his Marsh Flats, paying a life, and fetching up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts an Imperial Seal, fetching up a card onto the top of his deck and losing 2 life. Josh passes. Tanner draws and plays a Takanuma, Abandoned Mire for turn. He casts Oswald Fiddlebender and follows it up with a Dranith Magistrate. In response, Josh cracks Jeweled Lotus to help flash in his commander, Evelyn the Covetous. It enters and each player exiles the top card of their library. Then Dranith Magistrate resolves and Josh passes. Jack draws and plays a Marsh Flats, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up an Underground Sea of his own. He plays a Talisman of Indulgence, not paying for Evan's Sentinel. He casts Windfall. It resolves and everyone discards their hands and draws 6 new cards. Jack passes. Evan draws and plays a Shadow Spear. He attempts to equip it to Sentinel, only to remember that it has Shroud and can't be equipped. He also remembers his Mana Crypt trigger, which he loses. Never change, Evan. He casts Umezawa's Jite and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Josh loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Mana Vault, not paying for Evan's Sentinel. He plays an island and casts a Spellseeker, fetching up and casting a Demonic Tutor. Josh fetches up a card into his hand and passes. Tanner draws and plays a Mana Vault of his own, not paying for Evan's Sentinel. He plays a Thorn of Amethyst and passes. Jack draws and plays an Urza Saga, which moves to Chapter 1. He casts a Soul Ring and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Mother of Runes, equipping Mother with Lightning Greaves. He plays a Soul Ring and equips Sentinel with Jite. He moves to combat and attacks Tanner with Sentinel, giving it protection from white with Mother. Tanner takes the hit and Jite gets 2 counters. Evan passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Josh loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and takes a damage from his Mana Vault. He plays a Gemstone Caverns and pays 2 life to cast Gataxian Probe, targeting Jack, not paying for Evan's Sentinel. He looks at Jack's hand and draws. Josh passes. Tanner draws and activates Oswald, sacrificing Talisman of Hierarchy. In response, Jack flashes in an Opposition Agent. It resolves, and still in response to Oswald, Tanner exiles a white card from his hand to evoke Solitude. It enters and targets Opposition Agent, which Jack sacrifices in response to Viscera Seer, scrying 1. Solitude sacrifices itself and Oswald's ability finally resolves. Tanner fetches up a Trinisphere onto the battlefield. He plays a Weatherlight, not paying for Evan's Sentinel, and passes. At the end of Tanner's turn, Jack casts Abrupt Decay, not paying for Evan's Sentinel, destroying Trinisphere. The turn moves to Jack. Jack draws an Urza Saga and moves to Chapter 2. He pays 2 life to cast Gataxian Probe, not paying for Evan's Sentinel, targeting Josh. In response, Josh hard casts Force of Negation, not paying for Evan's Sentinel, countering and exiling Gataxian Probe. With alarm bells blaring, Jack casts Gilded Drake. It enters and exchanges control with Evelyn. He casts a Spellseeker of his own, fetching up a Reanimate into his hand. He casts Reanimate, targeting Opposition Agent, and then remembers that Tanner's Grafdigger's Cage is still on the field. Kicking himself, Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Felwar Stone. He casts a Glistener Elf and moves to combat, attacking Josh with Sentinel. Josh blocks, and in response, Evan activates Mother of Runes, giving Sentinel protection from blue. The attack bounces, and Jite gains 2 counters. In the second main phase, Evan equips Shadow Spear to Glistener Elf, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Josh loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and takes a damage from his Mana Vault. He plays a Scalding Tarn, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He casts Thassa's Oracle. It resolves, and with its ETB trigger on the stack, Josh casts Tainted Pact, paying for Evan's Sentinel. Tainted Pact resolves, and with no way to stop Thassa's Oracle, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Josh wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics and Ames this week and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won? Answer correctly and get 10% off your purchase.
I got a couple stacks pieces down, and it just wasn't enough. I couldn't really do anything with my board. Greasefang kind of just sat around, and I didn't have any discard for any of the vehicles in my hand, so they just kind of stood there.
Yeah, I forgot Tanner had a Grafdigger's Cage on the field, and I grabbed Reanimate. Next time I'll keep a closer eye on that and get interaction instead. I also windfalled Evan out of like all of his green sources. He's so mad.
So how'd the game go?
How do you think the game went? Jack, you windfalled me on turn 2. I had no lands. I had Lethal Infect on board the entire game. Actually, it was in hand, but the entire game, I had Lethal Infect on at least one person. They couldn't block it. They couldn't stop it. Someone was gonna die to Infect in a game of CEDH on camera, and it was gonna be so cool. And then there went my green split.
The game went great. It was a little awkward with as many stacks pieces as Tanner put out. It was hard to win, but luckily my opponents had answers for those, and fortunately Oppo couldn't come back in to stop me from fetching for the last land I needed to Thoracle Tainted Pact.
All right, so at the end of game 1, we have Harmless Offerings at the top, with Josh taking first blood, bringing them to 50 points, and our other 3 teams tied in second at 20 points each. Still plenty of games left, and we aren't even through round 1, and things are already off to an exciting start. Tune in next week for game 2 of round 1 of the CEDH Summer Slam.